Ever feel like when you're online, you're always clicking agree to things you haven't actually read?
Oh, yeah.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into one of those platforms, one we all use probably every day, Twitter. But specifically, those legal documents that most of us just scroll right past.
We're going to try to break down Twitter's terms of service, their privacy policy, and even their rules.
And we're approaching this not as lawyers or anything, but really just as users like you who are trying to figure out what we're actually agreeing to when we use this platform.
Yeah, because let's be real, no one actually reads all that stuff, right? Those pages and pages of legal jargon. We're trying to get to the interesting stuff.
Exactly, the stuff that actually affects how we use Twitter every day, what we can't say, that kind of thing.
And what I find really interesting is that these documents actually reveal a lot about Twitter,
Yeah.
like their values, how they view the content that users create. It's kind of hidden in plain sight.
It's true. Okay, so first things first, the user agreement. Now, this isn't just one document. It's more like a whole bunch of documents bundled together. We're talking the terms of service, the privacy policy, Twitter rules, and they even tuck stuff in there about like copyright and all sorts of other rules.
Yeah, and this is important because all of this basically makes up a contract between you, the user, and Twitter. And it lays out, your rights, but also what you as a user are responsible for.
Okay, so it's a two-way street,
Exactly.
which honestly, sometimes it doesn't feel that way.
Yeah.
But here's something that might surprise you. Those terms, those rules, they're not the same everywhere. Like it actually differs depending on where you live.
Yeah, for instance, someone who uses Twitter here in the US is going to have slightly different terms than someone over in the EU.
Why is that?
Well, a lot of it comes down to data protection laws. Like Europe, they've got that General Data Protection Regulation or GDPR, and that gives users a lot more control over their data, like the right to be forgotten.
Yeah.
So that obviously affects how Twitter handles data for users over there.
So it's almost like different rule books for the same game.
Basically, yeah.
And speaking of rules, did you realize Twitter actually has age limits?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you have to be at least 13 years old to use the platform.
Wow.
Or 16 if you're on Periscope. That's their live video thing.
Right. And it's not just the age limits. There are also whole sections in these documents about like account security and how you control your communications on the platform. And it really emphasizes that like as users, we actually have a big role in keeping our accounts safe and, managing who we talk to.
We often think of social media as this like free-for-all, do whatever you want space. But it's not really, is it?
Not at all.
It's funny, that tweet you wrote that went viral, that really witty observation, the one with thousands of retweets, technically Twitter could take that and use it in their marketing, like in an ad or something.
Yeah, and that gets at a really important point. As users, we keep the copyright to, whatever content we create, but we also give Twitter really broad rights to use that content however they want.
It makes you wonder, about ownership, like in the digital age. Are we really building our own brand if our content can just be used like that?
Yeah, it's a good question to think about.
It's almost like they're saying, sure, go ahead, express yourself, but also we might use that expression in our next ad campaign.
And it goes even further. The agreement even talks about what they call ecosystem partners. And this has to do with how Twitter shares data with other companies. Like, for instance, when you see a tweet embedded on a news website, these partnerships are how your content ends up getting shared and potentially even monetized.
So it's not even just Twitter we're dealing with here. It's this whole web of companies all kind of connected,
Hmm.
and they're all accessing and potentially using our data.
Right.
But it's not like anything goes on Twitter.
Oh, right.
Like they do have rules about how you behave.
They do. Twitter, as much as they seem to care about user content, they also want to protect their platform from misuse. And that's where the Twitter rules come into play.
And those rules cover some pretty serious stuff.
Yeah.
Like impersonating someone or sending spam. And even more nuanced stuff, like hateful conduct. That's a big one.
It is. So, for example, if anyone out there is thinking of starting a parody account, you really got to read their policy on impersonation very carefully because they lay out very specific guidelines on what you can and cannot do.
Yeah, and if you're thinking of doing those follow-for-follow schemes, don't. They actually have rules against that. They call it aggressive following or follower churn, and it's more regulated than you might think.
And the rules around hateful conduct, they've really tried to, pin down what crosses the line. And they're very clear that context matters in these cases. But at the end of the day, they also acknowledge just how damaging hateful speech can be.
That's a tough line to walk, right?
Yeah.
Trying to make sure people can speak freely, but also protect people from abuse and harassment.
Totally. And this is something that Twitter and a lot of social media companies grapple with every day. And you know what? We're going to be looking at those Twitter rules in a lot more detail later on. But first, we need to shift gears a little bit and talk about how Twitter actually uses all the data that it collects from you. And this is where their privacy policy comes in. And trust me, there are some pretty interesting things in there. And we talk a lot about data collection these days, but it's easy to just kind of glaze over the details. But with Twitter, it's really important to understand just how much information they're gathering about their users, especially since, it's a public platform.
Right, so it's not just like our email address and our username, the basics.
No, not at all. We're talking about things like, well, what kind of device you're using, your IP address, and even your location, if you have a location services turned on, of course. Oh, right, right.
And just like pretty much every website out there, Twitter uses cookies, those little trackers that follow you around the internet. So they're seeing what you're looking at, what you're clicking on.
So they know what, even if I'm not on Twitter, they still might have some idea of what I'm interested in based on my browsing history.
Exactly. And it goes even deeper than that. Twitter actually analyzes your activity on the platform, like what you're liking, who you're retweeting, even what you're reading. And from that, they can guess your interests, how old you are, what languages you speak. It's pretty amazing.
Wow. It's like they're building like a digital twin of you or something, constantly learning. It's no
Yeah.
wonder those ads feel so creepy sometimes. Like, how did they know I was thinking about buying a new pair of shoes? Well, that's exactly why they do it. That's the whole point of all this data collection, to give you, or at least try to give you, a personalized experience. And part of that is, of course, showing you ads that are more likely to get you to, click.
And they're not just keeping this info to themselves either, are they? They share some of it, right?
They do. They have what they call business partners, and they share some of your data with them. Remember that time you were, I don't know, looking up recipes on your phone, and then all of a sudden Twitter's showing you ads for like fancy cookware?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Yeah, that's how it works. Your online activity on different platforms can get linked, and boom, you've got a pretty detailed profile that advertisers can use.
Makes you think twice about what you do online, huh?
Yeah.
But we do have some control over this, right? Like, we're not just at their mercy. Huh.
You're right, you're not powerless. Twitter does give you a few ways to manage your data. You can change your privacy settings, decide what you want to share, what you don't. You can even deactivate your account if you need a break. Or, of course, you can go all the way and delete it entirely.
Okay, so they make it sound like we have options. That's good. But let's say I do decide to delete my account. It's not like hitting a delete key and everything just vanishes, is it?
You're right. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. See, even if you wipe your Twitter clean, the policy mentions that, those search engines, Google, Bing, they might have already made copies of your public tweets. So that digital footprint, yeah, that can be a lot harder to erase.
It's almost like a ghost of your online self still lingers. Kind of spooky when you think about it. But hey, speaking of things we should be thinking about, what about those Twitter rules? We talked about impersonation, spamming, all that.
Yeah.
But those rules about hateful conduct, those are super important, right? And you were saying they get into a lot of detail.
They really do. See, Twitter knows, or at least they say they know, that words have power. Hateful speech can have serious real-world consequences. So they've tried to really define what crosses the line. Like, they specifically say you can't use their platform to promote violence against, well, anyone, individuals or groups, especially if it's based on things like race, ethnicity, gender identity. You get the idea.
So it's not just about being mean. It's about using their platform to spread hate and potentially incite violence.
Yes, exactly. And it's not just, direct threats either. They have rules against harassment too. And that basically means you can't target someone with unwanted attention, abuse, that sort of thing.
So like what? Sending tons of messages, even if the person is asking you to stop?
Exactly. That's a big one. And sharing someone's private information without their consent, definitely not okay. They're trying to create a safer space for people, even if things get, heated sometimes.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, isn't it? Keeping things civil, but also letting people express themselves. Not always easy to do.
It really isn't. But the important thing to remember is that Twitter, they do have these rules in place. They might not always get it right, but they are trying to combat bad behavior.
So like what happens if you break the rules? It's not just a slap on the wrist, right?
Oh, no, not at all. They can do a bunch of things if you violate those rules. Like, they can take down your tweet, suspend your account. In some cases, especially if it's really bad, you could even get in legal trouble.
Wow. See, this is what I mean. We forget that Twitter, all social media really, it's not this separate world. It's still connected to real life with, real-world consequences.
Exactly. And what we've talked about today, this is just scratching the surface. There's a whole lot of legal stuff that shapes what we see and do on Twitter, how we interact with it. And yeah, I get it. It's easy to just ignore those terms and conditions, click agree without even thinking. But as we've seen, they really do matter. They affect us.
Yeah, for sure. I know I learned a lot today. I mean, we've decoded all that jargon, pointed out some surprising stuff.
Yeah.
Hopefully you listening out there, you're feeling a bit more informed now about Twitter, about your rights as a user, and just as importantly, what you're responsible for.
Right. Because when it comes down to it, it's about making choices. We have to be informed about what we're signing up for, what we're agreeing to. And now that you know how the game works, well, you get to decide how you want to play.
That's what this deep dive is all about, giving you the knowledge to make those choices for yourself. So next time you're about to hit send on that tweet, take a second. Think about it. What are you really putting out there? What did you call it earlier? A
Right.
digital footprint? Yeah. What kind of digital footprint are you leaving behind?
It's something we should all ask ourselves these days. I mean, Twitter, it can be amazing, connecting with people, sharing ideas, but like anything else, it's complicated.
Well said. Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap things up, but here's something for you to think about. After everything you've heard today, do you think you have more control over your online experience? Or less? It's a question worth considering. As we all try to navigate this crazy digital world, this Twitterverse, together,